interesting place to be. And one of the handouts that I gave you is an article called 10 Reflections on the 2018 Southern Baptist Convention. It was written by Chuck Lawless. He is a professor at Southeastern Seminary, and I just always appreciate his blogs. You can follow him at chucklawless.com. He's very insightful. And I think this sums up a lot of things that, that Tricia and I saw, a lot of things that we'll talk about tonight. And then we'll look at this other report and want to make sure that I can answer any questions that y'all might have. But you notice on Lawless's blog, the first one he says, "We are hurting but hopeful." We are hurting but hopeful. This was a year that for Southern Baptists, we experienced a lot of kind of turmoil in the upper echelons and the upper hierarchies of our agencies and institutions. Frank Page was the president of the executive committee of the SBC. He resigned earlier this year because of a moral failure that he didn't go into, and I don't know what it was. Paige Patterson was the president of Southwestern Seminary, and earlier this year there were some allegations of a sexual assault incident that had happened when he was president of Southeastern Seminary, and there were some allegations and accusations that he did not handle it well. He didn't handle it appropriately. Some more allegations surfaced in surrounding his time at Southwestern Seminary. And the Board of Trustees, and the reason I'm kind of going into detail with this is because it had a lot to do with some of the business that was on the floor of the convention. The trustees for Southwestern Seminary met at the end of April, and after about 15 hours of meeting, they determined that they would ask Dr. Patterson to step down from the presidency of Southwestern and take the role of president emeritus, which it continued to entitle him to all of the benefits, the retirement, everything else. And he was, they were working on a $2.5 million house on the campus of Southwestern Seminary that Dr. Patterson and his wife would move into. So that happened, I believe April 30th was the day that happened. Well, following that, there was a pretty significant outcry among many Southern Baptists, many people on Twitter, believing that was a poor response in light of the allegations of abuse and the allegations that he had not handled them well. And about a week after that, after some other information came up, the executive committee of the Board of Trustees for Southwestern had another meeting that, based on new information, they took away the president emeritus title from Dr. Patterson and took away the retirement package, everything else. So because of that, and if you don't know much about Southern Baptist history, Dr. Patterson has been a major influence in the Southern Baptist Convention over the past 20 or 30 years. In the late 70s, early 80s, the Southern Baptists went through what's been called the conservative resurgence, where they kind of reclaimed the Southern Baptist perspective on biblical inerrancy. And Dr. Patterson was one of the primary architects of that resurgence. So he is a revered, beloved figure in Southern Baptist life. And so a lot of people felt like he had been treated poorly by the trustees. And so as a result, one of the motions that, in fact, the only new business motion that was brought up on the floor of the convention that was discussed and voted on the floor of the convention was a motion to remove all of the trustees for Southwestern Seminary at once. And so the debate for that was scheduled on the last day of the convention, Wednesday. After some very interesting and colorful debate back and forth, it was voted down. and by a pretty significant majority. And so when Chuck Lawless says we're hurting but hopeful, that's kind of what he's alluding to. The year that we've had where people in power have taken some falls. But he said hopeful, and I would agree with that, because there was so much of a focus on some pretty healthy things in the convention. For example, the safety of women on seminary campuses. When the trustees, or when the presidents of all of the Southern Baptist seminaries, they give their report, people line up at the microphones to ask questions, and almost all of the questions that were related to our seminary presidents were around the issue of safety and security of women on campuses, which I think is positive. That also led into a lot of conversation about safety and security and abuse situations on church campuses, because we've experienced some of that there needs to be transparency, accountability in churches when there are issues of abuse. And so Ministry Safe is a legal organization that helps churches formulate practices and policies around protecting the people on campus. They were a major presence at the convention, and almost every one of the forums and seminars, in one way or the other, addressed the topics of women, valuing women, honoring women, how women are viewed in our convention, and then how women are kept safe on our seminary campuses. So hurting but hopeful is what he was talking about there. And along with that, we're a denomination that needs to grieve sin more. Number 3, we may not always like our system, but it somehow keeps us moving. And that's really true. The convention, you get in there, and there's, on the floor of the convention, there's microphones set up all over the convention floor. And one of the first things that they do is invite new business. And so anybody that wants to can go to a microphone and make a motion for something to be discussed. And you'll see in the report there were several motions. Most of them were either ruled out of order on the spot, or they were referred to different committees or entities in the convention, and you'll see some of those. Really, the only one that was acted on was that one that I mentioned about removing the trustees. So it's an interesting process, and sometimes you just have to laugh at the different things that come up with different people. But everybody gets a vote. Everybody gets a voice. Every church is able to send a maximum of 10 messengers to the convention, and many people don't. Obviously, there's always going to be more from that host state, so there are a lot of Texas Baptists, not nearly as many, from other states. But I saw a lot of our fellow Alabama Baptists, and so it's an interesting process, but it works, and it honors. The Baptist distinctives are autonomy of the local church and priesthood of the believer, and you see that in action every time somebody steps up to a microphone and makes a motion that reflects the views of his church or her church. You see both of those things in process. So we may not always like it, but it keeps going. We're Baptists. Baptists express their opinions. Boy, howdy do they. And this, number 5, we cannot respond to the few who act sinfully with our own sinful anger. There were some motions that came from a place of anger. And because of parliamentary procedure, and because of prayer, and because I think of wisdom on the part of SBC leadership, those that came out of a place of anger were not dealt with. They were ruled out of order. And I think that's as it should be. Number 6, we rally around missions. Southern Baptists were founded as a missions sending organization. And the highlight of any convention is the commissioning service that happens when we send new missionaries out on the field. And so, what was it, Monday night or Tuesday night? I guess it was Tuesday night. That was the commissioning service. 79 new missionaries sent out to the ends of the earth. And that is something that is always, always celebrated. You can disagree with everything else that happens on the floor of the convention, but we celebrate the sending and equipping of missionaries. And that's something to see. We need to take seriously the Evangelism and Discipleship Task Force reports. Last year at the convention, or it may not have been last year, it may have been more than just 1 year ago, but 2 different task forces were commissioned to figure out what's going on with evangelism, what's going on with discipleship in Southern Baptist churches. And I think the net takeaway from that report is that too often we see baptism as the finish line instead of the starting point. And there is an understanding that evangelism and discipleship are 2 wings of the same airplane, and you don't go anywhere without both wings. And so I think in coming years, and certainly from this pastor, you will see an emphasis not just on evangelism, not just telling people about Jesus, but on deepening in discipleship. And that's something that even before I got here, Greg was already working on with the Disciples Path material that you guys went through last year. So that's a convention-wide emphasis, evangelism and discipleship. Number 8, prayerful support to J.D. Greer. J.D. was elected our next president. The vote really wasn't even close. And just a little bit of history there, 2 years ago, J.D. Greer and Steve Gaines were both presented as candidates for president. And every ballot that came back was very, very, like, razor-thin close. I mean, like, Florida 2000 close. That's how close it was. And they did multiple ballots, and finally, sometime around Tuesday evening, Wednesday is the last day of the convention, J.D. said, for the sake of the unity of the convention, I will withdraw my name. And so Steve Gaines was elected, and Steve has done a very, very good job, very competent as president of the convention for the last 2 years. But the question was, will J.D. just automatically get it because people think it's his turn? And there was some opposition. Ken Hemphill, former president of Southwestern Seminary, was promoted as another candidate for the presidency. Some people saw it as a conflict between the younger generation, represented by Greer, and the old guard, represented by Hemphill. But I thought this was pretty beautiful. I went to a luncheon right before the vote on Tuesday. And at the luncheon, both Hemphill and Greer were invited to speak and present their vision and their strategy for leading the convention forward. And from both of them, you heard very clearly, we respect each other. J.D. said, I count him as a mentor, as a friend. There was an incredible amount of mutual respect. And they said, whatever you read on blogs and Facebook and everything else, we respect each other, we pray for one another, and honestly, whoever wins, we feel like it would be a win for the SBC. And so that was the attitude. And when the vote came, on the very first ballot, I believe it was about 68 to 32, Greer to Hemphill. So what some people were thinking would be another contentious element to the convention really wasn't. It was very, very peaceful there. But along with that, number 9, continue to work at facilitating conversations between generations. Conversations are happening, but they're not always strategic and intentional. And I believe that J.D. Greer is going to bridge that gap. I think he's got an awful lot of old school respect for the previous generation. with some new innovative ideas, and I think he's in a great position. Do what?
He's pretty young, isn't
He is young. Yeah, he's like in his 40s, so which is like real young for me anyway. Yeah, he's just a kid, but very, very wise. And I've read just about every book that he's come out with, and would recommend them all. I've got them on my shelf. You're welcome to borrow any of them if you just want more insight into kind of who he is. You got a good look at his heart when we did the study on Ephesians this past season. So that's J.D. Greer. And then last, pray regularly for the convention. That's our responsibility in the local church, is to pray for our church, but also pray for our denomination. We are the largest denomination, Protestant denomination in the country. We've got the best seminaries in the world. Of the 10 largest seminaries in the world, the 6 Southern Baptist seminaries all 6 of them are on that list. So we have a great education system. We have a great cooperative program. We send missionaries. We evangelize. The convention works, but we need to continue to pray for it. So those were, like I said, I think those reflections kind of sum up mine and Trish's observations. Trish, anything that you would add?
I should pause for questions.
Yeah, before I get into the specific report, any questions about any of that? I feel like Steve Gaines. There being no questions, we will. Now, what was your take on it, Trish?
On what part?
On the just overall convention.
I think that there was a lot more racial diversity from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I went early. Part of my responsibility in my new job is to be at the WMU meeting. And so that was Sunday and Monday before the convention, Tuesday and Wednesday. And that was fascinating as a new employee, just to hear and meet individuals from other states. WMU is a strong, supportive auxiliary, though. Not an entity, an auxiliary. There were diverse opinions expressed. You could watch. I found that I felt like a little kid just watching the different microphones, because you'd hear someone start talking and then they would have a camera on them. Huge. How many people were there?
Yeah, there are almost 10,000 messengers to this one, which is small compared to back in the days of the major controversy between fundamentalists and liberals, or moderates or conservatives. Back then, there'd be 40 or 50,000. So 10,000 is small by those standards, but large in comparison to recent years.
Diverse opinions, due process, fascinating exchange. A lot of, even the interim people I thought were very impressive. The interim president for Southwestern had tough questions from the microphones, but handled himself very well. A friend of ours, Augie Boto, is the interim for the executive committee. He was magnificent, just handled the questions, answered them well. So there was a lot of positive where there could have been uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she mentioned racial diversity. One of the cool things, the pastors conference, which I'd never been to before because I wasn't a pastor, but the pastors conference is basically a 2-day preach-off that happens before the convention starts. And the president of the pastors conference is elected at each SBC, and his job as president is to schedule who the preachers are going to be. And so the president of this past year's convention was H.B. Charles, who is an African American. And so as a result of his being the president of the pastors conference, of the 8 preachers that we heard in 2 days, 4 of them were African American. 1 of them was Hispanic. And one of them, which I thought this was, for me, one of the highlights of the convention, for the most part, all of these guys are just big name, mega church guys that you've heard of, that have podcasts, that have TV ministries, all of that. Tony Evans just lit it up. If you've never heard Tony Evans before, you can go to sbc.net and see all of the preachers for the Pastors Conference. But he lit it up. But for me, the highlight was a guy named Frank Pomeroy, who nobody would have ever heard of except that he is the pastor of First Baptist Church, Sutherland Springs, Texas. Sutherland Springs, Texas was the one that was the site of the mass shooting earlier this year, where 26 of his church members, including one of his own children, were shot and killed by a gunman who came in. And so hearing his convention message, knowing that he's not a guy that would be on anybody's map except for that tragedy, and yet there was so much humility, so much grace, so much hope for the future, and so many testimonies of how they've seen God at work since then. So if you go to SBC.net, if you only look at one sermon, look at Frank Pomeroy's. It was awesome. Okay? So yeah, that was one of the places you saw the diversity. And I think just looking at the people in the crowd, you saw it too. So that was pretty cool. All right, so I did this handout for you guys so you could kind of see some of the major things that we talked about, that were discussed, and a little bit of education. One of the first things that is discussed are the resolutions that are brought up. Typically, resolutions are submitted weeks or even up to a year in advance. And there is a committee on resolutions that decides how they will dispose of the resolutions that come in. And you notice the definition here. A resolution is an expression of opinion or concern. It's not a motion which calls for action. So it's not used to direct an entity to any specific action, but it communicates the opinions or concerns expressed. And when the Committee on Resolution votes them into the record, then they are intended to reflect the opinion of the convention. Okay? So 39 resolutions were submitted, and out of those 39, some of them were approved, some were declined, some were consolidated into one resolution because there were similar resolutions that were submitted. And so the ones that were read into the record, you see there, and I will comment on any of them. I've got the convention record here that shows what the resolution is. If you're interested, you can look at that. You can also look it up online at SBC.net. I thought one of the most interesting ones was number 4, renouncing the doctrine of the curse of Ham as a justification for racism. For generations, for decades, there's been an interpretation of the story of Noah and his sons that has led to some institutional racism on the part of Southern Baptist churches and other churches. Ham was the one of Noah's sons that was cursed because he saw his father naked and he went and told his brothers about it. And when Noah woke up from his hangover, he put a curse on Ham. And for a long time past, there's been an interpretation that said that in that curse, God changed the color of Ham's skin. And that from that point on, that was where the African race, where black people came from, was the curse of Ham. And so we formally, officially renounced that this year. So it's one of those things you file under It's About Time. But that's number 4. Any of those there that you want me to look up, that you have questions about?
What was that, the opioid abuse and addiction?
I think, let me look that one up so I can tell you exactly. And the resolutions, you'll have like whereas, paragraph after paragraph of whereas statements that just kind of establish the playing field. And you look at the resolved statements to see what was really done on it. So resolution number 9 on opioid abuse and addiction, the resolved parts were: we condemn and oppose all usage of opioids. We encourage the medical community to advocate for the prescription of opioids only under the most stringent standards. We encourage city, state, and national governments to work together to address the crisis. We demonstrate grace toward the addict and hope for recovery so that individuals might prosper and flourish. So it basically was saying we recognize there's a crisis, we're praying for it, and we want to encourage state, local, and national governments to work to end this crisis.
Now, number 8.
Number 8?
Guns, violence, and mass shootings.
Yeah, on gun violence and mass shootings, part of it was a commitment to pray for specifically First Baptist Sutherland Springs, to condemn gun violence, but at the same time keeping Second Amendment rights very much front and center, because I think that's where most Southern Baptists are. We support the Second Amendment. We are not in favor of anything that would undercut the Second Amendment. So again, skipping to the resolved parts, we express solidarity with all those that are victimized. We commend the heroism of police officers. We call on federal, state, and local authorities to address the epidemic. We affirm that gun ownership carries with it a great responsibility of being aware of the sinfulness of one's own heart. We affirm that it is the depravity, sinfulness, and wickedness of the human heart that gives birth to gun violence. And then finally, resolved, we affirm that the greatest antidote to the pandemic of gun violence and mass shootings is the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that is what Southern Baptists are on record as supporting regarding gun violence.
About number 7.
Number 7, Christ-like communication and the use of social media. Yeah, be nice online is basically what it comes down to. Yeah. Just when you think something goes without saying. Resolved that the messengers of the Southern Baptist Convention meeting in Dallas, Texas, commit to maintaining brotherly and sisterly love by resolving our differences in a biblical manner. Be it further resolved that we guard our tongues using caution and wisdom in our media and social media. Finally, be it resolved that even in the midst of differences, disagreements, and conflicts, we will engage one another with respect and winsomeness, speaking truth in Christ-like love while pursuing unity according to Ephesians 4:15. So, amen. It's on record. Any others? Okay. Jeff, you'll be interested to know that number 11 was met with resounding approval, celebrating 50 years of Southern Baptist disaster relief. So, whoop whoop.
I'm glad they
Yeah. Just a couple of, or one element of old business that I wanted you guys to be aware of. I thought it was interesting. There is a church in Albany, Georgia, Raleigh White Baptist Church, and you can Google the whole story, that was disfellowshipped by the Southern Baptist Convention for a lot of things that they were on record for in terms of racism and bigotry. Short story, they had invited a multicultural church to use their facilities. They were a declining church, and so a growing Baptist, multicultural, multi-ethnic church was using their facilities on Sunday mornings. And the longer they were there and the faster they grew, the more bothered some of the members of Raleigh White Baptist Church became. And so they began passively and actively working to undermine this congregation. And it kind of all came to a head when they decided they were going to have a homecoming service on a given Sunday morning. They didn't tell the church that was meeting in their sanctuary about it. And so when the church start came to set up their services for that morning, they found the doors locked against them. And they were told, sorry, you can't come in. And they were told if you need to use the restroom, you need to go to the convenience store down the street. So just some pretty blatant nastiness that went on there. And the Southern Baptist Convention said, we're not gonna fellowship with them. We are open to their repentance, and when they do, we would love to welcome them back into the fold. But until then, we don't feel like they represent who Southern Baptists are. And so they were disfellowshipped. So under new business, the first thing that happens is it's that open mic day when people just come and can make any motion that they want to. And so there were 20 motions that were brought to the floor of the convention. Most of them were either ruled out of order or referred to committee. There was only the one, and that was the motion to remove the trustees of Southwestern that was brought to the floor. And so you see some of them there. The one that I put in bold that probably you've heard a little bit about, there was a motion that elected officials not be part of the annual meeting program. There was another motion that the convention cease inviting elected officials to speak at the annual meeting. It was not, most of y'all know that Mike Pence, Vice President Pence, was invited to speak at the convention. And
he reached out.
yeah, thank you. He reached out to the Committee on Order of Business to speak at the convention. And it was announced to us when we got there. And there's really nothing shady or under the table about that part. The fact is, when I worked at Lifeway, we had George W. that was speaking at a men's event, and we could not promote that until people were at the conference, simply for security reasons. So it wasn't anything that the convention was attempting to do under the table. Nevertheless, when it was announced, there were a lot of people that were opposed to it for several reasons. Some of those reasons were practical considerations. He was scheduled to speak on the last day of the convention, when a lot of people who are flying have already checked out of the hotel, are coming to the convention with their bags and everything else, and because of heightened security, could not get into the convention with any bags whatsoever. No backpacks, nothing. So there was inconvenience there. There was also, we didn't know on Tuesday morning how contentious the convention was going to be. And so people were thinking, wow, if this is anything like St. Louis 2 years ago, where it took forever to even figure out who our next president would be, what if we've got a lot of business left to take care of that we have to table, that we can't act on because the vice president's speaking? So there were those concerns. There were concerns about Pence himself, or about the Trump administration itself, because of the divisiveness that people perceived, because of some of Trump's unpopularity around the world. One person mentioned the safety of Southern Baptist missionary personnel, which honestly was a smokescreen, I think, but it was, that was one of the things that was said. I think most of the objections came around the idea that here we are talking about unity, talking about racial reconciliation, talking about the resolution that we passed on immigration, which, if you read the language of the resolution, one of the things Southern Baptist agreed on was immigration policies which honor the personhood of those immigrants, and specifically that keeps families together. It's in there. And so for that reason, a lot of people did not want Pence to speak. Ultimately, the motion passed to have him speak by about 60 to 40. So that was maybe the most divisive thing in terms of being split right down the middle that we dealt with. When Pence did speak, he was scheduled to speak for 10 minutes. He spoke for 40. He started with some affirmations of Baptist and talked a little bit about his own testimony, but it was a political speech, and it was a touting of Trump's record that even for people that liked Trump, voted for Trump, it felt out of place. And so one of the things that was referred to committee was this motion that in the future we don't invite or we don't accept requests from sitting politicians to speak at conventions, with the exception of the mayor of the host city. That's the only one that they said, let's let him speak to, or her, to give a greeting on behalf of the host city. So the executive committee is going to kick that one around for the next year. Don't know what will happen with it, but that was kind of the main thing that was potentially divisive. And you see another one. There were 3 separate motions that tried to get at that. 4 really, because one person made a play for saying, okay, if he's going to come, can you get him to speak about racial reconciliation? And that failed too. That one was ruled out of order because nobody tells the vice president what to talk about. So that was that. The cutest moment of the convention came when a little 9-year-old boy, Zach McCullough of Carbon Hill Baptist Church in Alabama, came to the microphone and said, I make a motion that there be a Southern Baptist Children's Ministry Recognition Day. And it was fantastic. You talk about seeing Baptists work and the process working. When a 9-year-old kid has the same voice in a room of 10,000 that a former president of the Southern Baptist Convention does, that tells you we've got a pretty good system. So that one was referred back to committee also, and little Zach is going to go to Nashville and meet with the executive committee and argue his motion. It's going to be cool. So scroll down on my Facebook history and you can see a video that someone took of Zach making his motion. But that was a highlight of the convention.
James,
Yeah.
my church is in Walker County.
Really?
And that little boy, I know his grandfather.
Do you really?
And the thing about it is, his grandfather come from a group of brothers. There's probably about 8 brothers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if any of them ever went to church.
Yeah.
And when I heard his daddy preaching,
Mm-hmm.
I looked, when I first saw him, I thought, man, he looks awful familiar. He looks like Coke Color. And I got to looking at him, and sure enough, and he's just a, old country redneck boy preaching. So for this little fella to be at the convention and coming from the background he comes from, that's a miracle itself.
That's cool. So let's do this. If we do have a Children's Ministry Recognition Day, work with me and let's get that kid to give a testimony here. I bet we could swing. I bet we could pull that off. That would be epic. That would be epic. Okay. So, and if you're interested in that, there's a Baptist Press article that I'll link to. Just go to bpnews.net and search for the article, Messengers Make 20 Motions and Debate Swibbett's Trustee Action. Okay? we're about done with time. The back page is just, I wanted to tell you about the report and where Alabama is relative to the convention. Alabama is fourth behind Texas, Georgia, and North Carolina in number of Baptist associations. We are fourth behind Texas, Georgia, and North Carolina in number of churches. There's 3,246 churches, Southern Baptist churches in the state of Alabama. 47,544 total in the SBC. We are sixth behind Texas, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina in the number of baptisms, 13,451. A total of 254,122 baptisms in the Southern Baptist Convention this past year, which I believe is a 30-year low. A 30-year low. The average Alabama Baptist church, if you just divide the number of churches by the number of baptisms, or vice versa, Trish can help me with that. She was a math major. The average church baptized a little over 4 people in 2017. The average SBC church baptized 5 people in 2017. Average Alabama church has 285 members, but they have an average of 89 people attending on a given Sunday. So that can make you feel good about where we are as Glynwood Baptist Church. It can also challenge you in terms of how many people claim membership, yet how few actually show up on a given Sunday. 204,855 average Sunday school or its functional equivalent. That's what FE stands for. Average Alabama Baptist gives $789.59 a year to the overall receipts of the church.
That's the highest thing.
Pardon?
The number one thing.
Not according to the report. Now, okay, so what the report doesn't show is how much of that is CP giving. That was total receipts. Yeah, I couldn't find the total CP giving. Trisha's saying that Alabama is the highest cooperative program giver in the Southern Baptist Convention. Trish, is that per capita or total bottom line? Okay, okay. So that's something to be proud of. But look at I'll close with this, the comparison of 2017 to 2016. We've added more churches. There's 272 more Southern Baptist churches nationwide this year than there was last year. And yet there's fewer members. 211, we've lost 211,000 members since 2016. Baptisms, we baptized 26,000 less in 2017 than we did in 2016. But the one that I want us to just kind of ponder is the ratio of baptisms to members. By this, it takes 59 Baptists to lead one person to faith in Jesus. One new baptism for every 59 Southern Baptists. Did y'all see the thing I posted about the number of churchgoers that say they don't know what the Great Commission is? Only 17% of churchgoers, according to a Barna survey, agreed that they could articulate what the Great Commission was. That's stunning to me. If you had only 17% of a fire department that knew how to put out a fire, how safe would you feel? If you had only 17% of lifeguards that knew how to save a life, how safe would you feel? Only 17% of churchgoers can articulate what the Great Commission is. And I think you see the results on that in the baptism to members ratio. It shouldn't take 54 people to lead one person across the line of faith. We should see more than 5 people per church added to the table. I mean, that's job one of the church. And I'll close with this quote from J.D. Greer. If we plant churches without evangelism, then, sorry for the typo, if we plant churches without evangelism, then all we're doing is attracting bored Christians through better marketing. We're swapping sheep. We're getting people who are tired of their church coming to our church instead. If we do missions without evangelism, then we're just putting Christians on airplanes so they can be disobedient somewhere else. We got to do better. We got to do better. Any closing comments or thoughts about this?
I think this week we're halfway through the Bible.
You what?
We're halfway through the Bible on Bible reading.
Yeah, that's something to celebrate. We are halfway through. And no, I haven't sent out an email in a while, have I, Debbie? I got some work to catch up on. Guys, thank you for being here tonight. Thanks for hearing the report. I hope this was helpful. I think it's good for us to, like I said, to know what's going on in our larger convention. And we've got a lot of things to be excited about at Glynwood because we blow the curve on a lot of these.
I'd just like to remind people we're still accepting volunteers for the nominating committee for the different positions. So if you guys would just talk that up amongst the people that you know, and let's see if we can get these positions filled.
Very good. Very good. All right. Let me pray for us. God, thank you for this night. Thank you for what you've called us to be. Thank you for our church. God, I thank you for where we are. But as it's been said before, we know that we're not where we want to be, but we're so thankful that we're not where we used to be. So please continue to shape us more and more into the people that you would have us to be, not just as a church, but also as individuals, for your glory. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all so much.